In the smoke-choked chaos of a war zone, every second could mean life or death. But when Sergeant Luke Carter felt a tug on his jacket, he didn't turn to aim his weapon. He turned to find something utterly unexpected. A tiny, trembling wildcat cub with frightened eyes and a bleeding paw. What was this wild animal doing in the middle of a battlefield? And why had it chosen him? What Luke discovered in that moment would change not only the course of the mission, but the course of his life forever. The soldier and the shadow in the trees. In the silence between gunfire, it wasn't a fellow soldier who reached for me. It was something wild, trembling, and forgotten. The late afternoon sun bled through the Louisiana pines like firelight through stained glass. The air was heavy with sweat and smoke, the dirt underfoot still warm from the morning's mock firefight. Overhead, a hawk screamed and vanished into the clouds, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. Fort Polk's training grounds stretched for miles, dense, tangled forests where soldiers were pushed to their limits. And among them was Sergeant Luke Carter, 32 years old, 6'2", lean and muscled from over a decade in service. His skin was a deep bronze, his eyes darker still, almost black, eyes that didn't just see the world but weighed it. He crouched behind a fallen log, his M4 rifle braced and ready, sweat dripping from his jawline. The camo grease on his cheeks was smeared, revealing the hard lines of a face used to war and worn thin by it. This wasn't real combat, not anymore. These days it was war games, drills. But even pretend gunfire had a way of stirring up memories best left buried. Luke's squad was 5 clicks northeast of the main base, deep in the forest for a nighttime simulation. The air buzzed with tension, the kind that always came right before things got loud. He waited for the signal to move, another mock recon, another enemy camp. But as he adjusted his pack, he felt it. A tug, subtle, low. Not enough to trip him, but enough to make him whip around. He expected a snag of brush or maybe one of his guys playing around. Instead, he saw eyes. Amber, unblinking, wide. The creature was small, barely the size of a football, but wiry with thin legs and a twitching tail. Its fur was pale gray, mottled with black spots, dust and pine needles clinging to it like static. 2 ears stood up from its tiny head, each tipped in black like charcoal smudges. The baby bobcat bared its teeth again and bit down harder on the bottom hem of Luke's uniform jacket. Luke didn't move. Not yet. Instinct warred with logic. He was trained for wild encounters, snakes, even the occasional coyote, but this? A bobcat kitten alone, wounded and trembling? Its right back leg dragged slightly when it shifted. There was blood, dark, clotted on one paw, and a thin line of red across its side. It let go of his jacket finally and sat there, silent, watching. And then the strangest thing, it didn't bolt. It didn't hiss or growl. It just stared up at him, like it had chosen him. Luke's heart kicked against his ribs. He hadn't felt that in a long time. Not since Afghanistan. Not since that boy, the one with the bird in his hands, the kid with the broken sandal and the bleeding dove cupped so gently, asking for help in a language Luke didn't speak. Luke had walked away then, orders in his ear, his conscience in his throat. And now here it was again, another plea, this time in fur. A flicker of motion snapped him back, radio static. The squad was regrouping 200 yards east. Time to move. Luke looked back at the cub. "You're gonna get yourself killed out here," he muttered, crouching down slowly. The bobcat flinched but didn't run. He reached out, palm open, careful, slow. The cub leaned forward and sniffed, then, surprising even him, nuzzled its face into his gloved hand. Something cracked in his chest. He slid off his rucksack, unzipped the side, and made space. Inside, he wrapped his jacket into a cradle, gently tucking the cub into it. "You better not pee in there," he whispered. The cub blinked, curled in tighter. By the time Luke caught up with his unit, no one noticed the extra weight on his back. Not yet. Back at the base, Luke avoided the main barracks. Instead, he headed toward the motor pool's back shed, mostly abandoned except for supply crates and a busted Humvee or two. He slipped through the side entrance, locking the door behind him. He set the pack down gently. "All right, little shadow," he murmured, pulling the cub out. It was shivering now, the adrenaline gone. He took his canteen, poured a bit into his palm, and offered it. The cub lapped slowly, weakly. Its tongue was rough as sandpaper. He dug into his medkit, rubbing alcohol. Gauze. A tiny splint for field fingers, good enough for a wildcat's limb. He worked in silence, focused. By the time he finished wrapping the paw and swabbing the scratch, The cub had fallen asleep on his boot. Luke leaned back against the cold steel of the Humvee and stared at the ceiling. He hadn't felt this kind of quiet in his soul for years, and that was dangerous. He knew it. 3 hours later, someone knocked. He stiffened. "Luke, you in there?" Jenna Alvarez. The squad medic. 29, short, sharp, always smelled like eucalyptus and antiseptic wipes. He opened the door a crack. "Need something?" he asked. "I could ask you the same," she said, crossing her arms. "Why'd you grab 2 trauma kits instead of 1? Luke hesitated, then opened the door all the way. Jenna stepped in and gasped. "Oh my God, is that a bobcat?" "Shh," Luke motioned, closing the door behind her. "She's hurt," he added. "I couldn't leave her out there." Jenna squatted beside the cub, her eyes scanning its small body like a scanner. "It's dehydrated, malnourished, probably lost her mother to a trap or a coyote." Luke nodded once. They didn't speak for a moment. "She's trusting you," Jenna said quietly. "That doesn't happen with wild animals, Luke. Not unless they're desperate, or you're safe." "I don't know what the hell I am anymore," he muttered, sinking down beside the cub again. Jenna gave him a look, soft but edged. "Well, maybe to her, you're exactly what you needed someone to be for you." Luke didn't reply. He just ran his fingers through the cub's spotted fur. After a long pause, he said, "I'm calling her Shadow." The next few nights, Luke slept in the shed with Shadow curled under his arm. He stopped having nightmares. For the first time in over a year, he didn't wake up gasping. And in that fragile quiet between waking and dawn, a new bond formed. Not between a soldier and a mission, but between a broken man and something small, wild, and healing. The silent plea. Sometimes the smallest creatures carry the heaviest messages. If only we're still enough to listen. The next morning broke in streaks of gold and fog, the pines outside Fort Polk stretching like sentinels into the sky. Deep in the back corner of the base, in that dimly lit motor pool shed, Luke Carter stirred before his alarm. His hand instinctively reached down to the bundle of warmth curled against his side. Shadow. The bobcat kitten had nestled into the crook of his arm sometime during the night, her soft breath rising and falling in rhythm with his own. She looked peaceful now, even playful, one paw draped over his forearm. But when he sat up and gently pulled away, she whimpered. A sound so soft, so human, it nearly stopped his heart. Luke exhaled slowly. This wasn't sustainable. He had broken rules, big ones. Unauthorized contact with wildlife on base, smuggling an animal into a restricted zone, falsifying gear logs. If anyone found out, he'd be reprimanded or worse. Shadow wasn't a pet. She was a wild animal. And yet, every time he tried to justify leaving her out there, every time he reminded himself of the consequences, his mind flashed to that moment in the woods, the way she had looked at him, the blood, the way her little body had bitten his jacket, not in attack, but in plea. He knew that look. He'd worn it once. He still wore it sometimes in his dreams. Luke stood and moved carefully around the room. He poured a shallow dish of water from his canteen, then grabbed a protein bar from his field rations and crumbled part of it into a corner. Shadow perked up, her eyes flicking open. She watched him, alert, but no longer afraid. "You eat," he said softly, crouching beside her. "We've got some thinking to do." Later that day, he found Jenna leaning over a stack of MRE crates in the infirmary. The moment their eyes met, she straightened. "She's okay?" Jenna asked without preamble. Luke nodded. "Still favoring that paw, but she ate this morning." "Good. You're gonna need to make a plan, though. If she's spotted, it's over. You know that." "I know." Jenna folded her arms. "I did some reading. Bobcat cubs that young don't usually leave their dens unless something happens to the mother. It's possible Shadow wandered for miles looking for help. And she picked you." Luke looked away. "Don't say that like it's something special." "But it is," Jenna said firmly. "Do you know how many people a wild animal would pass before approaching one? She chose you. That's not survival instinct. That's something deeper." He let that sit for a while. "Then, can you help me? Depends what you need. I want to keep her hidden until she's strong enough. Then maybe we find a wildlife rehab group. Somewhere safe." Jenna hesitated, then nodded. "I'll get you medical supplies, some wet gauze, antiseptic, but I need to warn you, this doesn't end clean. You'll have to let her go." "I know," he said, and in his voice there was already grief. That night, While the others lounged in the rec tent watching football, Luke slipped back into the shed. Shadow was waiting, sitting upright. Her ears perked at the sound of his footsteps. She mewed when she saw him, a soft greeting, hopeful. He smiled despite himself. "Hey, little ghost." He pulled off his boots and sank to the ground, stretching out beside her. The lantern's yellow glow danced across the floor, casting soft shadows along the crates. She climbed into his lap, unsteady but determined, and curled there like it was the most natural place in the world. Luke ran his hand slowly down her back. "You know," he whispered, "I used to think I didn't deserve peace. After Mason died, after the convoy got hit, I kept seeing the fire, kept hearing the screaming. There was a kid. I never even saw his face, but his scream, it was like it got stuck in my chest." Shadow blinked up at him, her eyes reflecting tiny twin lantern flames. "They tell you to move on," he murmured. "To heal, but no one tells you how. I got good at silence, good at forgetting I was even a person." He paused. "But you made me feel like one again." Outside, the wind brushed against the steel walls of the shed like fingers on a drum. Pine needles hissed. Somewhere an owl hooted. Inside, the soldier and the Wildcat rested, two broken things stitched together by circumstance. The next few days unfolded with quiet routine. Luke rose early, checking Shadow's bandage. She was walking better now, the limp nearly gone. He rigged a cardboard box into a makeshift litter tray, found a soft rag for bedding, and rationed scraps from his rations. Bits of jerky, torn bread, boiled egg from the mess hall when no one was looking. He spoke to her often. About war, about his brother back home in Georgia, about the pine trees outside and the way the light hit them at dawn. Shadow didn't answer, of course, but she listened. And sometimes that was more than enough. Each night, before sleep, he whispered her name and rested his palm on her small, rising side. The quiet that settled between them wasn't the silence of emptiness anymore. It was the silence of understanding. But secrets, even the gentlest ones, never last. And Luke felt it. Like thunder, too far to hear but strong enough to shake the ground. The tremor was coming. He just didn't know yet what it would look like, or who it would take to face it. Still, in that fleeting, fragile window of time, just a soldier, a shed, and a wildcat, Luke Carter started to believe in something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, the bond in the barracks. Sometimes the thing that saves you doesn't walk on two legs. It walks on silent paws and trusts you before you trust yourself. Morning broke crisp and quiet at Fort Polk, a rare lull between simulations. Dew clung to the pine needles like tiny shards of glass. The usual chatter in the mess hall was subdued, soldiers moving with that familiar rhythm of routine. For most, it was just another training day. For Sergeant Luke Carter, it was something else. He moved with intent, his boots crunching over gravel, his mind already in the motor pool shed where he'd left Shadow just before dawn. She was growing, fast. Her coat, once dull and patchy, now shimmered with silvery gray hues under the lantern light. Her eyes had shifted too, no longer just wide and scared, but curious, alert, watching him with something like devotion. It was dangerous. This wasn't some rescue to pass along to wildlife services. This was becoming a connection, raw, real, and dangerously human. Still, Luke didn't stop himself. He couldn't. That afternoon, while the rest of the squad prepped for their next mobility drill, Luke stayed back under the pretense of organizing the field packs. In truth, he was creating space, clearing an old metal footlocker and lining it with a folded wool blanket. Shadow's new nest. With her paw nearly healed and her energy returning, she was beginning to roam inside the shed, climbing crates, knocking over empty ammo boxes. At one point, she even swatted at his dog tags while they swung from his neck. It made him laugh, a real laugh. Not just a huff or a smirk, but a full sound that startled even himself. He couldn't remember the last time that happened. That night, Jenna came by again. She stepped through the door with her stethoscope still around her neck and a plastic bag in hand. "Found some kitten chow at the PX," she said, tossing it to him. "Technically for domestic cats, but it's got the nutrients she'll need." Luke caught it with one hand. "Thanks." She crouched beside Shadow's box as the cub padded forward, sniffing at her boots. "She's growing into her legs now," Jenna noted. "Won't be long before she's climbing your bunk." Luke smiled. "She already tried the Humvee." Jenna sat back, watching him. "You're different." "Different how?" "Lighter," she said. "Less armored." He didn't know how to respond, so he changed the subject. "Think she'll be ready in a few weeks?" To transition? Jenna's smile faded. Probably, but don't pretend this'll be easy. I'm not. You already care more than you should. He looked down at the cub now curled against his thigh. I know. The next week everything changed. It started with a drill, urban warfare simulation on the southern compound. Luke's squad had just begun sweeping the first building when Private Harris tripped a sensor, triggering the mock IED alarm. In the chaos, Luke barked orders, rallied his team, and redirected them behind a rusted-out school bus. The adrenaline pumped sharp and fast. For a moment it felt real again, like Kandahar or Al-Basra. But when it was over, when the smoke cleared and the all safe was called, he noticed his hands trembling. Not from fear, from the realization that he hadn't once thought of Shadow. For the first time in weeks, his mind had left her behind. The guilt hit like a blow to the chest. He sprinted back after debrief, sweat still clinging to his shirt, boots kicking up gravel as he crossed the base. His thoughts raced with worst-case scenarios. Shadow found by a patrol, or worse, escaped and injured. But when he reached the shed and threw the door open, he found her waiting, calm, sitting beside the footlocker. She chirped when she saw him and padded forward, brushing against his leg. He dropped to his knees. God, you're okay, he whispered, pulling her close. Her body relaxed against him, small and warm and very, very real. He held her there for a long time. That night, something shifted. Luke didn't go back to his assigned bunk in the barracks. Instead, he stayed in the shed, sleeping with his arm draped loosely over the footlocker. Shadow curled beneath his chin, purring in a way that was barely audible. He dreamed of pine trees and a long dirt trail winding into the forest. At the end of it, she stood. Older, stronger, her wild eyes watching him before turning to vanish into the trees. He woke with tears on his face, and he didn't hide them. Jenna noticed the change, too. She brought more supplies, hydration drops, kitten-safe wipes, even a few toys from the nearby pet store in Leesville. One was a rubber mouse on a string. Shadow pounced on it with joy, spinning in awkward circles, growling in her throat like a hunter in training. She's going to be fierce, Jenna said, watching her. She's learning from you. Luke nodded, but his chest tightened, because he knew what came next. The closer Shadow got to recovery, the closer he got to goodbye. And for the first time in his adult life, he didn't want to let go. The turning point came late one night. Luke sat on the shed floor, eating cold beans from an MRE pouch, while Shadow batted at a loose shoelace on his boot. The radio crackled in the background, another unit reporting successful completion of a convoy simulation. He looked down at the cub. Do you know what's coming? He asked quietly. Do you feel it? Shadow paused, then climbed into his lap, resting her head on his chest. And there it was, that familiar ache, the one he carried since the war, since Mason, since the convoy ambush that left 3 dead and Luke with a scar across his back he never talked about. He'd carried that pain into every room, every moment, until now, until her. He closed his eyes and let his hand rest on her back, feeling her tiny heart beat against his ribs. I don't know how to say goodbye, he whispered. She didn't answer, but she didn't move. And so, in the quiet of that shed, surrounded by grease-stained tools and forgotten crates, a soldier who thought he'd lost his soul found it again. Not in glory, not in a medal, but in the soft, insistent heartbeat of something wild that had chosen him, in the ruins of war, to teach him how to live again, under fire. He thought he was the one protecting her, but in the moment it mattered most, she proved she was there to protect him too. The weather had turned. Thick clouds blanketed the sky over Fort Polk, casting a dull gray light over the pines. Thunder rumbled somewhere in the distance, but no rain fell yet, only the weight of a storm that hadn't made up its mind. Sergeant Luke Carter stood in the staging area, fingers drumming against his thigh, boots laced tight, vest snug. His squad was gearing up for a live fire simulation, one of the most dangerous drills in the cycle. No blanks, no rubber, real weapons, real risk. He hadn't wanted to be here, but orders didn't bend to emotions. Eyes up, Carter, called Staff Sergeant Middleton as he adjusted his earpiece. Today we're running red line protocols. Hostile engagement, 3-man breach, full-body recon. Your point? Luke nodded sharply, face unreadable. Only Jenna could tell something was wrong. She gave him a look across the field, subtle, questioning. He didn't answer. Because how could he? How do you tell someone you're afraid not for yourself, but for a wild animal sleeping in an old shed with no idea you might not come back? Shadow. She had been healthy now for weeks, agile, fast. Her limp was gone. Her eyes were bright with that unmistakable, untamed energy. But she still waited for him, still watched the door every night, still crept into his lap and purred against his chest. This was just supposed to be another drill, a contained, controlled exercise. But something inside Luke didn't feel right. Not today. The transport Humvee rattled as it bounced over uneven dirt roads, heading deep into the woods where the perimeter simulation would begin. Trees blurred past, a blur of green and brown and gray. Luke sat in the back with his rifle cradled in his arms, mind replaying everything. Shadow curled in his hoodie, licking her paw, the way she chirped when she saw him. The dream of her running free through a pine forest. When the truck rolled to a stop, the team dismounted quickly. They fanned out, scanning the terrain. Luke moved like a shadow himself, his mind locked in the muscle memory of years spent in desert cities and jungle trails. They reached the first checkpoint without incident, then the second, then gunfire. But it wasn't simulated. No blanks, no call-out. The sound was real. A sharp pop-pop from a direction no one expected, due east beyond the designated range. Luke's heart dropped. Before anyone could react, chaos erupted. Two men went down instantly, not hit, but diving for cover. One screamed into his comm, "Is this part of the drill? Do we have civilians on sight?" More gunshots. No, this wasn't a drill. Luke scanned the tree line and caught sight of movement. 3 figures, dressed in mismatched fatigues. Not army, not part of the simulation. "Poachers!" he growled, ducking behind a fallen log. "They've breached the zone." It had happened before. Illegal hunters thinking the training area was unmonitored forest. But never during a live fire op. This time, they were armed. And close, Luke signaled his squad back. "Retreat to fallback, I'll hold position. Carter, don't be a hero!" Middleton yelled from behind a boulder. "I've got cover, go!" He barely heard the response before sprinting deeper into the trees, zigzagging to draw fire away from the retreating unit. His boots pounded the earth. Adrenaline flooded his system. A branch caught his shoulder. He stumbled, cursed, kept moving. But then pain, a sharp, searing punch to the back of his thigh. He hit the ground hard, rolling behind a thick pine. Gritting his teeth, he looked down. Blood. Not gushing, but steady. A grazing shot. He was lucky, for now, but he couldn't move fast. He pressed his hand to the wound, wincing, trying to breathe through the pain. The world swam for a moment. Dirt and pine needles filled his nose. Then, a sound. Soft, delicate, a padded step on dry leaves. He looked up and blinked. Shadow. She stood barely 20 feet away, halfway between him and the trees. Her ears were flat, her body low. She looked like a ghost made of muscle and firelight. "What the hell?" Luke whispered. She had followed him. How? How had she gotten out of the shed? Tracked him this far. He tried to wave her off. Go back now!" But she didn't move. Then a crunch behind him. He turned in time to see one of the poachers, scruffy, armed with a long rifle, stepping from the brush, scanning for targets. Luke couldn't lift his weapon fast enough. He braced for the worst, and that's when Shadow leapt. A blur of claws and instinct, she hurled herself from the undergrowth, slamming into the man's chest with a shriek. He screamed, stumbled, and his rifle clattered to the dirt. She didn't bite him. She didn't need to. The surprise was enough. Luke surged forward with a yell, tackling the stunned man and pinning him. A quick blow to the head knocked him out cold. Shadow stood panting beside him, fur raised, trembling. "Jesus," Luke muttered, gasping. "You're insane," she chirped again, tilting her head. And then a second sound. Boots, his squad. They broke through the trees in a wave, weapons raised, eyes wide. "Carter! What the hell is that?" Jenna skidded to a stop beside him, looking from the unconscious poacher to the small wildcat still growling low in her throat. Luke pushed himself up, clutching his bleeding leg. "She saved my life," he said. The others stared. No one argued, because the evidence stood before them. Small, fierce, and absolutely fearless. Later at the base infirmary, Luke sat shirtless while a medic cleaned and stitched the wound. Across the room, Shadow lay curled on a pile of blankets Jenna had arranged. "She followed you 5 miles, Jenna said. "We tracked her prints, through brush, down slopes, across a drainage ditch." Luke shook his head, still in disbelief. "She shouldn't have even been able to open the door. She clawed it, pried it open," Jenna said. Smart as hell, determined. He looked over at the bobcat, now dozing peacefully, her sides rising and falling. He swallowed the lump in his throat. I owe her more than I can ever repay. Jenna sat down beside him. No, she said softly. She didn't do it for a debt. She did it because you gave her something she never had before. What's that? A reason to believe in someone. Luke nodded slowly, because he knew exactly how that felt. Recovery and recognition. Sometimes heroism has 4 legs, sharp claws, and a heartbeat that never gave up on you. It had been 5 days since the incident in the woods, and the base was still buzzing. What began as a training mishap had turned into a story that traveled faster than any mission report. A wild bobcat had saved a decorated soldier's life, and not just any soldier. Sergeant Luke Carter, one of the base's most respected leaders, a man known for his silence and steel. But now people saw him differently, and they saw Shadow too. She was no longer a secret in a shed. She had a name, a story, and unexpectedly a place in the hearts of soldiers who'd once scowled at mess hall meals and griped about weather drills. Even Staff Sergeant Middleton, the no-nonsense commander who rarely cracked a smile, knelt beside her once with a quiet, good girl, and a piece of smoked turkey from his ration tray. Shadow accepted it with dignity, then looked back at Luke as if waiting for approval. She didn't need it. Everyone at Fort Polk knew this bobcat had done something extraordinary. Luke, still healing from the wound on his thigh, walked with a slight limp now. But he didn't care. What he did care about was the hearing that had been scheduled with the base commander and the wildlife division. There were rules. Shadow was a wild animal, technically a protected species. She couldn't stay on a military base forever. She wasn't a pet. She wasn't property. But she wasn't just a bobcat anymore either. The conference room was packed when Luke entered. Jenna sat beside him. The wildlife rescue officer from Baton Rouge adjusted his glasses and tapped a folder. "We've reviewed the full incident," he said, "including footage from Carter's body cam, witness statements, and base surveillance." He paused. "There's no denying the bond between you and the animal, and there's no question. She saved your life." Luke gave a single nod. The officer looked up. "The law gives us discretion in extreme cases. Shadow is strong, healthy, and capable of being reintroduced into the wild, but only if she chooses it." Luke's throat tightened. "So what are you saying?" The officer smiled faintly. "We'll release her, but we're giving you the chance to be the one to do it." Luke's heart twisted. He didn't speak right away, because he knew what that meant. A goodbye and a gift. The place we found each other. Letting go isn't losing. Sometimes it's the final act of love. 2 weeks later, Luke stood at the edge of the pine forest just beyond the Fort Polk boundary line. His leg had healed enough to hike the trail, though the scar was there to stay. A thin reminder of what almost happened, and what didn't. The sky was clear that morning, brushed with pale orange and soft pink streaks as the sun rose behind him. Shadow sat in the grass nearby, her body calm but alert. She had grown. Her shoulders more defined, her stride fluid and powerful. No longer a kitten. She was wild again, but not without memory. He'd brought her favorite scarf, the tattered army green cloth she used to curl into as a cub. He laid it on the ground between them. Shadow patted forward and sniffed it, then looked up at him. There was no fear, no confusion, only understanding. "I don't know how you found me that day," Luke said, kneeling beside her, "or why you picked me, but you did. And I'm still here because of you." Shadow flicked her ear, her golden eyes blinking slowly. Luke reached out one last time and placed his palm gently against her fur. "You saved me," he whispered. "And now it's my turn." He stepped back. For a moment she stood still, then she turned. Without a sound she began to walk, each step smooth and graceful as she slipped into the pines. At the edge of the trees, she stopped and glanced over her shoulder. One last time, their eyes met. Luke smiled, a single tear sliding down his cheek. "Goodbye, Shadow." She vanished into the trees like a whisper, and the forest once again held its silence. But this time it wasn't lonely. It was full of everything they had shared: hope, healing, trust, and love that didn't need leashes or cages, just freedom. Some stories don't end when the last word is spoken. They linger in the quiet spaces between memory and meaning. Shadow came into Luke's life not with fanfare or drama, but with a silent plea, one that changed everything. It was never about saving a wild animal, nor about breaking military protocol. It was about listening to something deeper, something instinctual, the language of trust. Luke didn't just rescue a bobcat. In a world that taught him to shut down, to survive without feeling, she reminded him how to feel again. Now the question turns to you. What would you have done? Would you risk rules and reputation to protect something small and wild? Would you follow instinct over regulation? And if a creature reached out to you, not in words but with eyes full of silent desperation, would you look away or kneel down and listen? That's not a question with easy answers, but maybe, just maybe, it's the kind of question that tells us who we really are. This has been Paw Prints and Stories. Until next time, may you never miss the quiet call of a heart in need.